Made at University of Canberra, Faculty of Arts and Design, 2022.
The Convoy to Canberra was an anti-vaccine mandate protest which occurred between January and February 2022. Police estimated 100,000 demonstrators were a part of this gathering, with many coming in from interstate to protest what they saw as government overreach in the area of COVID-19 vaccine requirements. There were many arrests as a result of this convoy, including one man who was arrested for firearms possession charges. Aside from the altercations with the police, many of them had less than favourable interactions with Canberra locals too, with these locals finding the convoy a nuisance, if not worse. One such local is Canberra woman Jane McGuiness. Jane McGuiness is a Canberra local who was born here and has lived in the ACT on and off since 1975. She works in the public sector and has two elderly parents who live in the ACT who were in vulnerable positions during the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Her fears were increased as a result of the arrival of this convoy to Canberra, as one of her parents lived extremely close to the epic showgrounds where the convoy was situated, and the other one was in hospital care. Both of her parents were in the group labelled as most susceptible if they were to contract COVID-19, and the convoy's massive anti-vax status posed a threat to their health. While they were thankfully safe during the time the convoy was in Canberra, it was a source of much frustration and fear for Jane, as she, like many Canberrans, felt that the people taking part of the convoy were targeting the wrong people.
My name is Anna and I am your host for this episode. I am a student at the University of Canberra and I am in my final year of my creative writing degree. So I have Cameron with me here today.
Howdy, Anna.
We are both working on this podcast with our group as well, but we're just going to talk about our personal experience with the convoy. Obviously, Jane has personally for me, Jane's perspective of the convoy is similar and I agree with her beliefs, but I don't have any relatives. It was just me and my housemates when the type of stress with the convoy.
That was the fear that someone at work would bring it in, I'd get it and I'd give it to my mum and mum would die.
As we are an episode within UC's podcast, Listening to Canberra Voices, we would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, traditional custodians of the lands where the Bruce campus is situated. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. For information on COVID-19 or contact information for advice, visit the website https://www.covid19.act.gov.au/. If you are not in the ACT but looking for information, Google COVID-19 and the state you are in. Canberra is the home to many people, not just politicians. But from the end of January to mid-February of 2022, it was the stomping grounds for thousands of protesters. The movement labelled the Convoy to Canberra. The convoy was in Canberra as they wanted an end to COVID-19 mandates, especially on vaccines. It is understandable why the convoy came to Canberra, as that is where our nation's politicians meet. But it is also interesting to look at the perspective that a convoy that was mainly anti-COVID vaccine came to the most vaccinated city in Australia. And this is why we'll be exploring their interactions with Canberrans this episode. So today we are going to be talking to Jane, who is a Canberra local, and we are going to be talking about her experience with her family during the pandemic, as well as the time during the convoy to Canberra. Hello Jane, welcome.
Hi.
Alrighty, so I guess we'll just jump in. The first question I have for you is, what was it like going through the pandemic with older people in your family? I know that you say both your parents are older, so obviously kind of new challenges for the pandemic.
So my mum lives in Watson by herself and my dad's in a nursing home in the south of Canberra. So obviously they're both very vulnerable sort of people. I think if you had to sum it up in a word, the word would be stressful.
Yes.
Dad in the home was well looked after. The real issues with him was the fear that someone else would bring it in and give it to him.
Of course.
And that that he'd go into an extended lockdown, which there was short bits, nothing too drastic, luckily. Mum, despite her best efforts to leave the house, we basically told she was on lockdown in the house.
Arrested into the house.
Yeah, so my sister and I took turns bringing food past. My son works at a supermarket, so he did lots of food deliveries. but we had to stop her from going to the gym, from going out to the shops. It's, no, I just want to go. I'm just going to duck down to, no, Mum, you're not.
No, yeah, didn't really get it. Was that, no, you got to stay home because it's really, really important.
Yeah. But once it became more obvious just how bad it was, then there wasn't a problem. That was in the initial wave, was trying to keep it
because obviously when COVID hit, I originally from Sydney, so I just went back to Sydney, which it was worse in Sydney than it was Canberra. So you guys obviously this kind of delayed of Canberra second lockdown happened officially.
It was stressful on all accounts really, and I know that everybody's had their own experience of it. But so once she was in lockdown, really on a day-to-day level, it was just a fear that it was going to come and get us and what that would look like. Before vaccination, the fear that this would be, and I think and not just the fear, but the guilt that we would have felt if we'd been the ones that brought it in and killed my parents.
Yeah, essentially.
Like that was awful. But they're super vaccinated now, obviously.
I guess going off that, what was the process like of getting them vaccinated? Were they pretty much top of the order?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're old.
Yeah.
So they were first in for no real reason. They insisted on doing it through their local GP. They would have been better off going and lining up with the masses like I did, but they had their appointments really early on. They were counting down the days to get their immunisations. It was really good for the people who were eligible early. The system seemed to work really well. It was people like supermarket workers who really should have been at the top of the priority list but couldn't get vaccinated till way down the list. That was where I felt that it was a bit of a letdown.
No, yeah, it's really interesting because from my perspective as a UD student, you understand why you're at the bottom of the list, but I was the one I went through my local GP because the official one, the one that they sent out to all the young people, it was like, alrighty, November, like that's when your first one, and then my GP apparently just had some, but it's good to know that the vaccination rollout was extremely effective for those who needed it. Yes. And I guess that's why it went quite quickly in Canberra, because it was more about, at first there wasn't a real need, and when that need happened, it really
I think we were the most vaccinated population for a long time,
I think we became the most vaccinated population in all of Australia, and then we even became the most vaccinated city in the world. Yeah. Because obviously you do understand that in terms of population, Canberra's not as big as some other capital cities, but it was just nice seeing that people were really being quite safe about it.
And I think we've got a highly educated demographic here. We've got a lot of smart people who believe science and want to do the...
So in terms of anti-movements on vaccinations, we, as a population in Canberra, the statistics show that people are not anti-vaccine, you would think. But obviously when the convoy to Canberra happened, we had this mass sudden influx of people who were anti-vaccine and more anti-mandates, but obviously anti-vaccination was a big part of it. So what was it like being a Canberran native who saw this incredible quick rollout and everyone agreed to it, and then have these people come out who had opposite views to that? Yeah,
it was a funny beast. I get it. I get why they came to Canberra, because that's where the House of Parliament is. That makes sense. But they just lingered on a long time. It felt the congestion to traffic, the people. Because Mum's in Watson, which is right near Epic, where they were. So the actual disruption to people's day-to-day lives, which I guess was the point that they wanted to make. But they were annoying the wrong people. People in Canberra were vaccinated. We didn't want it. We weren't going to. It's not like we're going to change our minds and go, oh, actually, YouTube's where it's at. I'm not going to be vaccinated anymore. You can't take it back. There's no takebacks.
Yeah, no, it's not how it works.
No, I get it, but I also think from watching the media, it seemed like they moved that story out of importance quite quickly to try and deflate the convoy. If it had been, it was in the news, obviously. But it was like the media had made a decision, let's just ignore these people so they go away.
Yeah,
so the people of the rest of Australia seemed to forget that it was even happening. I had people interstate say, they're still there?
Yeah, I do. I remember that at the start, and I'd be talking to friends and they'd be like, you would have people coming in at my work, at the bar, and I'll give it to them. I've only had a few aggressive, like someone at my workplace. All the rest of them just said they had mask mandates, and obviously you can't really argue that. But it was just really weird where you would get used to it again, and then something would crop up.
It was weird. And the fact that they all came back several times, it's like, that's just weird. You're annoying the people of Canberra because, really, let's face it, the general public, everyone that I spoke to, they were just sick of it, sick of the disruption to their daily life, and yet they just wouldn't go away.
I think the one thing people forget is that obviously Convoy to Canberra is it is a political issue. It was a big one. That was all of it. But I think if it was anything else, I've gone to only one other protest in Canberra, which is the Roe versus Wade, but that was in the Civic near the Canberra Centre and the KFC in that little area, and we had a walkabout around the road, which was had police presence. Done. It was
it's all very organised. We're very polite protesters in Canberra, aren't we? Like you walk up the road, you go to the AAA at the Parliament House where you're allowed to protest, you do your bit, you get your media coverage, you go home. And then this was different.
I remember I was trying to get lunch in Civic, and this couple was like, sit down next to us, and I'm like, okay, and I was like, you guys from Canberra? They're like, no, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm just gonna go to Guzman, and they were like, really? And I'm like, yeah, you guys have a good one though. It's just kind of, you try not to be mean to random people, but you're just kind of like, it got to that point.
It was a sort of a weirdness. Everyone sort of had a little paranoia. I hope we never have to go through anything like that ever again.
I know, So, and you said before that your mother was in Watson, so where near Epic was. Did she have any run-in, or was it more just that the more stress was just added to the already stress she had?
They were actually people in remember they had cars that were all marked up with political. They would go through their townhouse complex and be blowing horns and waving flags, and it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, the Prime Minister doesn't live here. Like, you're not going to change anything. How's this going to help? It was just distressing people for no real. I mean, obviously they wanted to make a point, but they were making the point to the wrong people.
Yeah, it did feel like that. So we've been talking about how it hasn't translated well to Canberra views. Do you think if, I don't know, Canberra was maybe bigger, like Sydney or anything like that, it would have been different? Or is it more just in terms of, obviously, the Convoy able to get their political message through there, to talk to politicians, other parties, but do you think they just weren't ever going to kind of push their message through to the local people because of it being Canberra, or just because of the vaccination maybe? I
think they were never going to push their opinion on the people of Canberra because the people of Canberra are educated and vaccinated.
Yeah.
And the mandatory vaccinations, most people in Canberra, well, everyone that I know was happy to have it. I'm going to get vaccinated anyway, and I don't really want someone in my workplace to not have it and be bringing this in, because then, and that was in the initial stages before the vaccine, that was the fear that someone at work would bring it in, I'd get it, and I'd give it to my mum, and mum would die.
Yep. And it's still, even with vaccinations, it only can dampen sometimes the effects for someone. It doesn't necessarily mean they won't get it.
And you don't know if you're going to be the random person who has a severe reaction to the virus. Like, I haven't had it yet. I've been very fortunate not to. I still don't know whether it'd be me that would get the severe complication and end up in a whatever.
I don't have any none of my older relatives live in Australia, but when I got COVID, I had body shakes throughout, like could not breathe, had to constantly with stuffing like Tylenol and like Panadol, every type of like flu and pain medication down my throat. And I was thinking when all my relatives were texting me saying, hope you feel better, and I was just, it's that same thing. I'm like, I can't imagine what it would have been like to pass it to someone I know, and be it worse for them. That was the scary thing about COVID.
Yes, absolutely.
Alrighty, well, thank you for coming in and talking to us, Jane. I think we'll wrap it up there.
Awesome, my pleasure.
Thank you. The convoy started in Canada.
Oh, really?
Okay. Truckers were upset with the restrictions because it had an effect on their job, so they went on these protests. And then, I don't know, but it's the thing, you saw that it then came, people in Australia were like, well, we could do that because we also have restrictions.
I guess that's the power of social media. You see that kind of crew, like a lot of them are pretty active on Facebook, and I'm sure they would have seen something online and been like, hey, like we can do that
too. And It's just, I guess, interesting when it's on obviously it's on a smaller scale, because obviously Canada's so much bigger, and and then in Australia it was just that it was quite, it in theory is a very small population. It's not like Canada or America where there is technically a bigger maybe anti-vax, anti-mask